"Lucy, you have no idea how shocked I was when I found out that this artist is blind." The secretary and the accountant chatted to each other all the time during work hours, which made the boss, who was returning from the meeting and noticing this, very angry. After all, he paid his employees well and constantly wrote out bonuses to them. And they were engaged in some incomprehensible chatter instead of working responsibly and completing the tasks assigned to them on time. If they had so much free time, then Chris will certainly figure out what to do with them. When he passed these talkative women, the boss gave them an angry look. But he suddenly saw a photo open on the screen of his secretary's monitor. It was a masterfully painted portrait of a beautiful woman. But the man was struck not by how well it was painted, but by how much this woman looked like his wife. When the secretary finally noticed the presence of the boss, she quickly began to close everything extraneous on the computer, nervously clicking the mouse button, and the accountant quickly ran to her office. Chris wanted to reprimand them, but the portrait attracted so much attention to itself that the man forgot about everything in the world at this moment. How could a blind artist paint a person so beautifully, and not just some person, but his wife? Chris asked the secretary, "Where exactly did you see this portrait? Please don't pretend this conversation didn't happen during work hours. I heard everything with my own ears. Thank God they haven't let me down yet." The secretary blushed all over, but quickly pulled herself together, and with great pleasure began to tell the boss that the young artist was painting wonderful pictures, including portraits in the park on the way to their office. The most amazing thing is that he doesn't see anything. He is blind, and how perfectly he depicts such subtle facial features, noticing all the details. The big question is how he manages to draw such beauty. Chris decided to walk around the square at lunchtime and buy the same portrait if the artist was still there. He really wanted to surprise his wife by showing her this masterpiece. He was sure that she would immediately recognize herself. After all, she looked so much like herself in this portrait, as if he had looked at her photo in his youth. Walking through the square, the man saw the artist, around whom people crowded. He immediately understood from the enthusiastic voices that the people gathered admire the work of the blind artist, who surprisingly turned out to be a young guy. And someone even left with a purchased painting. Chris watched the artist from the side for a while, and then he nevertheless decided to approach him. He longed to see the portrait that struck him so. Chris took a look at the paintings and noticed that the shades of colors and landscapes, portraits, and still lifes didn't always match those that he usually sees around him. But on the contrary, this gave the images a special charm, making them a little magical. Chris looked for the very painting for which he came and felt goosebumps run through his skin. Nearby, he saw two more portraits of the same woman. What a resemblance! It was still hard for him to believe that all this was painted by a blind artist. The man cautiously asked the artist, "Do you really see nothing when you paint portraits?" The artist shuddered a little and turned in the direction where the sound of the voice came from. "In fact, I see a lot, but in my head. My fantasy works much better than the eyes that closed some time ago, probably forever." The artist lowered his spectacles a little, and Chris recoiled in horror, because the sight was not pleasant to his eyes. He felt sorry for the guy, but he couldn't help him, even with a strong desire. It's unlikely that doctors could perform a vision restoration surgery, because the guy had no chance. The young man's eyes were covered with a white solid veil. Perhaps only a transplant could help in this case. Surely there are long queues for it, and most likely the price is like half of Chris's fortune. Unpleasant feelings inside him began to grow, so the man bought all the paintings from the guy, paying the artist much more than he asked. And while the young artist did not have time to move away from the shock, feeling the bills again and again and realizing that there was clearly something wrong, Chris quickly walked to his car and drove home, loading his purchases into the back seat. Chris didn't even think to ask the guy who really is that beautiful woman who is depicted in the portraits, hastening to quickly escape from the feeling of his own worthlessness. It was difficult for him to be close to the person whom he wanted to help, but couldn't. Chris began to wait impatiently for his wife to show her the portraits and surprise her with such a strong resemblance. He decided to hang the largest portrait in his office, and he didn't yet know what to do with the other two portraits. Lana returned home in the late evening. She hugged her husband as usual and told him that she was tired of idleness. Chris didn't allow Lana to work, firmly convinced that in the family, the husband should be the main breadwinner. The man didn't spare any money for his wife, paid for her cosmetic services, massage, swimming pool, and various types of training. The couple lost their first child immediately after his birth, and God didn't give them more children. Therefore, they had nowhere to leave their inheritance. Where else would they put their money if not spending it on themselves? The couple traveled quite often and just enjoyed life. Chris offered his wife a couple of times to take a child from an orphanage, realizing that they were unlikely to have a child of their own. It was already too late for her to give birth, and doctors gave disappointing forecasts. But she reacted sharply to her husband's words and said that she was not ready to engage in raising someone else's child. And Chris himself also thought sometimes that, probably, he could not love his baby. After all, it happens that a man whose parental instinct is not as well developed as a woman's is difficult to accept even his own child. And it will be hard for them to constantly think about their own children, whom they have failed to save. The man helped orphanages financially and made sure that his funds were spent on the merits. Even Lana gladly helped him with this, but they were not ready to take someone else's child, because the pain in their heart remained a bleeding scar after many years and constantly reminded of itself. Honey, I have a surprise for you. Today, I bought a painting from an artist sitting in the park near our office. I felt sorry for him, and this portrait also attracted my attention. Chris showed his wife the same portrait, and she gasped muffledly. This is the spitting image of you, is it not? Chris told her how he saw a photo of this portrait at his work, and then went to the square to personally see the masterpiece, painted by the hand of a blind artist. But the wife just brushed it off and said that this was probably such a marketing ploy. Someone else paints these paintings, and then they deceive everyone by making them look like the work of a poor blind artist in order to sell them for a higher price. But when the husband said that the guy had named a low price for this, the woman thought. Lana murmured, "Why does she look so much like me?" Lana looked at the portraits for several days and couldn't believe the reality of such an amazing resemblance. This beautiful girl from the portraits seemed more and more familiar to her, but at the same time, she didn't recognize herself in her. It seemed to be her, but at the same time she is not. And how does some unknown blind artist know her? Sometimes Lana cried, standing at the portraits, and said that their daughter could be like that. And one day she said to her husband, "Chris, look, the cut of her eyes is like yours. But this is not the main thing. Take a closer look at this speck next to the temple. It looks so much like a mole, like yours." This similarity is not without reason. Chris didn't pay much attention to such details, but Lana's excitement was also transferring to him. Chris saw how the situation worries his wife, so the man decided to bring the guy to his home to personally ask him the questions that drew so much attention to himself. The man asked his wife's driver to bring the blind artist, tempting him with a delicious dinner and a generous reward for the visit. But the driver was afraid that Chris would reprimand him for the failure. He decided to do everything for sure and brought the guy by force. The young man became worried, clutching a palette and a brush to himself. What is this? Why am I here? Why was I forcefully brought here? Chris hastened to reassure the artist and assured him that no one wishes him harm. The man apologized for the behavior of his too executive driver and invited the guy to drink tea. The artist introduced himself as Kevin. He turned out to be a very smart and intelligent guy, and at first, his voice trembled with excitement and fear. but after a while, he was still able to calm down and relax a little. Suddenly, Chris asked, "Kevin, how do you distinguish colors?" At this time, Lana joined their conversation. The woman put freshly baked buns on the table and looked at the artist carefully. It was a young guy of about 25. They had definitely never met in the past. She would definitely remember him. Lana and Chris listened with interest to Kevin's story. "My girlfriend helps me. She makes special marks on the tube so I don't mix up the colors. She also likes to paint, but now she has to work for two, and I sell my paintings to somehow help her." The guy told them that he was forced to drop out in his second year of college and join the army. It was there that an accident occurred that deprived him of sight. Margaret turned out to be a devoted and faithful girl. She didn't leave him, becoming his support. Together, they lived in an apartment that Margaret got from the States, since the girl was from an orphanage. After the accident, Margaret was the only person left to support him. Even his parents turned their backs on him and told him to go to his bride, whom they didn't want to accept. "After all, I paint Margaret on my portraits. I remember every feature of her face, and every day, my fingers help me not to forget her beauty. Too bad I won't be able to see her again. Now, only a transplant can help me. But this surgery costs so much money that we can't even dream of earning so much sometime. However, I don't complain about life. Every day I thank God for sending me Margaret. And every day I ask her to leave me so that I'm not a heavy burden for her. I love her and wish her the best. She should be the happiest, even if not with me." Kevin said the last words with undisguised disappointment. Chris frowned. "Are you saying that your girlfriend is in the portraits I bought from you?" "Yes, you are right. True, I don't know how accurately I conveyed her features of her face and pick up the colors. Margaret always says everything is perfect. But I know perfectly well that even a sighted person doesn't always manage to perfectly match the shades, and even more so for a blind artist. Therefore, I don't charge a high price for the paintings that I sell. I'm ashamed to ask for a lot of money for something that even I have not seen." Lana asked suddenly, "Excuse me, but how old is your girlfriend?" "She will turn 25 in September." A cup of tea slipped from Lana's hands, and a scream came from her lips. She couldn't believe that this could be, but Kevin named too many coincidences. She exchanged glances with her husband, and they both realized that they were thinking the same thing, and began to ask Kevin to arrange a meeting with Margaret. Lana confessed to the guy that she suspects that Margaret might be her relative, but kept silent about who exactly Margaret might be for her. For a while, the guy doubted and worried, but he couldn't immediately begin to trust strangers who brought him by force to their home. But he agreed, saying that in the meeting, Margaret would come to the square to take him home. "You can meet her there if you so desire." The young men hoped that they would not be able to harm Margaret in a crowded place. The guy believed with great difficulty that these strangers could be Margaret's relatives. But where does she have such rich relatives? This strange Chris paid a lot of money for the paintings. Margaret squealed with delight when she saw the money. In the evening, Margaret timidly approached her boyfriend, and Lana and Chris approached her. They were shocked by such a striking resemblance, but far were they too afraid to believe in something. After all, if they believe that this is their daughter, it will hurt them to lose her again. Margaret was of exactly the same opinion when Chris and Lana told her of her suspicions. The girl agreed to take a DNA test, according to which they could find out if it was true that her parents were found in such an unusual way. The results were ready 3 weeks later. Lana and Chris opened the envelope with terrifying trepidation, and both cried when they saw the result. Margaret was indeed their daughter. It was hard for them to believe. They never thought that they were deceived. They considered their daughter dead, and now they didn't understand who they had buried. The scandal with maternity hospital only led to a mistake that day. The head doctor said it was a human factor, and this mistake cost too much for those who mourned their child for a long time. Meanwhile, the girl was sitting at the window in the orphanage and was waiting for her relatives to come for her. As it turned out, That evening, the midwife did not feel well. There were many births, so Margaret was accidentally confused with the girl who was born to some alcoholic woman, whom she refused and who died almost immediately after birth. There was no cue for Margaret because of her poor pedigree, so to speak, and no one wanted to take her away from the orphanage, fearing that her mother's genes would be passed on to her. But the fears were understandably unfounded. The girl grew up strong and healthy, and she was very different in development from her peers, noticeably ahead of them. Chris promised that he would call to account all those responsible from the maternity hospital, and the apology of the head physician had absolutely no meaning for him. After all, he missed the opportunity to see how his daughter grows, how she says her first words, takes her first steps. A couple of weeks later, all the news was talking about this terrible incident, and the head physician was forced to resign. Margaret was glad that she had finally found a family. On the girl's birthday, her father gave her a gift, paying for an expensive surgery for her young man. At first, Margaret was embarrassed to accept such a generous gift, but she understood that it would benefit her lover, and her parents are not to blame for the fact that they were separated for so many years. After the transplant, Kevin slowly regained his sight and began to see, so far vaguely and blurry. But now, he could again admire his beloved and was not afraid for their future. Soon, Kevin made Margaret a marriage proposal, and she agreed. Kevin didn't stop painting, although the doctor strongly advised him not to strain his eyes for a long time, because the young man could make a masterpiece even with his eyes closed. His new painting showed a happy mother, father, daughter, and little granddaughter. Finally, the big house of Chris and Lana was filled with sonorous children's laughter when the grandchildren were born. In this way, portraits of a blind artist could change the lives of two families at once.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. "I will do my best." Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. "Did you not hear what I said?" "I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully." Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. "I don't care what they say, I plan to quit any time," he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. "To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance." As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. "All right, everyone's presentations are done." "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me. "There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer." He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick! What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here." "He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident, especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it." Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. "Do you two know each other?" "Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, 'I'm moving to the sales department soon.' If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it." On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. "Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived." I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. "They look good." "What are you talking about?" "These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one?" As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. "Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay?" I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. "Yes, I'm inviting my father." "That's great. I might invite my parents too." I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.